Hello everyone. Hope everyone's warm out there.
Yeah.
Did you bring the fire, Uncle?
I am the fire. All the way. Yeah.
Deadly, thank you, and I feel the warmth of your fire always. So thank you for being here, and thank you everybody for coming out on a cold night. Sorry it took a while for you to get through the doors. We're inundated with numbers, we're online, and it's a very exciting time in this country right now. Before I go on any more, I just want to start quickly with toilets down out through my right here. Dan is showing the way. Obviously you can't smoke in here. That'll happen outside. And if you need anything at any time, just go to one of my staff members who'll be walking around and will try to meet your needs for the night. I'd like to introduce a brother of mine who we've been on a long journey together for many years, starting at Camp Sovereignty back in the day. Uncle Ringo Terrick, a staunch Wurundjeri warrior, a custodian of his country, and someone who lives and breathes his culture and his connection every day. Brother Ringo, over to you.
I can hear you. I thought I dropped you home last night from the fire. He had his own songs on the radio. It was deadly. As while your sister here introduced, I'm known as Uncle Ringo by my mob around here. And happy to be here tonight with all these legends behind me. And welcome you on behalf of our mob here. I'd like to acknowledge all our old people and, this part of the country we're in here today, this evening. Significant part of our old country, but one of the most heavily impacted upon by colonisation. There's probably about this many people remain there in the Wurundjeri country after all the rot. There's all after the smallpox and everything, decimated our mobs. And all the lies. It's time for truth telling. And I'm finally, I'm so happy to see this. Me, Calvin, Gary, Jim, Robbie, so happy to see this in our lifetime, to fill a whole town hall in Fitzroy around these types of conversations, because there's lots of conversations that need to be had around this. The missing piece of people's existence in their country is the connection to this culture, which is inadvertently your birthright and your inheritance as well. So claim your country. We invite you to walk beside us as we're making giant strides now into the areas that we need to be done. This is from old writings. An old blackfellow was sitting up on the hill in Pasco, in Batman, up on Batman Hill, when the Port Phillip Association moved on Melbourne and introduced a treaty that wasn't sanctioned by the government at the time, so it wasn't words of paper it was written on. Basically, we know what treaty's about, and it's about good intentions for people and righting wrongs from the past. And reconciliation is about making amends. What for, you know, good white fellows? You all about sit down and build them up big one, don't you? And call them Melbourne Town. No more than poor blackfellas and possum here. May catch, you drive them away, kangaroo, me, wish you had old tracks. Amazement sat on Batman's face, the gas stood Pasco, for quickly waning in his toilet, this black prophetic son of Oscar soil poured forth the speech without a single broken word in English, such as those that heard could never hope to reach. Though blind my eyes and sightless, he said, my spirit once more sees. The grassy hills are about me, the water and the trees. I see the flowing Yarra. I see the sandy shore and the waves that play in the bay. In the deep blue bay, and this I see and more. But lower changes coming, and through the mist of years, I see vast buildings rising. The gum tree disappears. The bay with ships is crowded. The landward people teems. With hurrying feet, they fill the street and pour along in the streams. We kangaroo in our pasture, where wallabies now throng. On iron roads with flying loads, are swiftly borne along. We're yet in utter solitude to bury the weary emu stalks. Conquering white man with his herds in safe possession walks. With wondrous tools, the stately trees are felled and cut, and ribbon to fence about the land from out of which my race is driven. With swift decay they die away. Our soil is bought and sold. The slender claims are ours to set against your love of gold. That was Melbourne Punch, the 17th of April, 1856. Pay my respects to everyone here, all First Nations people there, acknowledge all my old people. We've got some good work going up at Camp Sovereignty with architectural plans, and we're almost there with the City of Melbourne. It's happening. There's a board meeting at Wurundjeri on Wednesday, and that'll be moved on the agenda. So that's a big... Me, Robbie, told him we all agreed the draft plans are incredible, incorporating the waterfall, so we're manning the camp now 24 hours, so it's a permanent campsite. So well done to the 2006 crew that were there. For the first time ever, the Aboriginal community of Melbourne, of Ngarra, have the real opportunity now to grab some big space up around the parcel of land we know as the King's Domain. So the name change will be one of the immediate things in that. But yeah, it's moving along really good. And we love the field, the fire's shining and smiling. So just mentioned a couple of elders passed away recently, so pay our respects and honour those families. Acknowledge the multicultural community and your support as we, particularly the Palestinian community, we're with you in your struggle. You are our people, and our home is your home. Bunjil bless you all here tonight. Acknowledge all the Palawa mob and William mob over there. We bought some beautiful artworks from the Black Pearl, which is directly behind us, and we'll just invite people to drop through there after tonight's meeting if you like. So I'll finish off in language. I think Taljam's the oldest man in the room. So Wamajiga, Yawan Kundi Balik Nam in the welcome to Wurundjeri Council. Wamajiga, thank you.
Thank you, brother. Okay. Well, we do have an incredible lineup tonight, and I want to first say thank you to Professor Gary Foley for riding his bike out here tonight and being part of this conversation. So please put your hands together for Professor Gary Foley. And we've been honoured again to have someone come across the ocean and he's got an incredible story of resistance and activism and right now in this country is being demonised by the authorities for protecting his country. Uncle Jim Everett. Yeah. And last but not least, Ngarra Murray, who is the co-chair of the Treaty Assembly of Victoria. So please make Ngarra welcome. Where do you start with this conversation that we've been having for decades and decades and decades and decades? These conversations were happening before I was born. It's not something new. It's not something that, all of a sudden was a good idea. It's something that our old people have fought and died for, and that is peace. Treaty is a mechanism towards peace. And we need peace in this country. We need the oppressive regime, the genocidal regime in this country to stop killing us. And we want to prosper in our own country like everybody else seems to do. We want a peace treaty. And so I've invited these incredible activists in their own right, but also people who've been part of my journey to come and talk about what that looks like. And so we'll have a series of questions that I've got lined up, but there's also questions from the audience that I have in front of me. We might have some time. Obviously, we're going to run over time. But it's a conversation that we need to be having every single day until we get peace. So, and I'm Lidia Thorpe. I'm the Senator for Victoria. I'm also a Gunai Guditjamara Djapurrung woman. And I wouldn't be here without my old people, particularly my grandmothers, my mother and my uncle. I'm going to start off with a pretty easy question, I think, in everyone's minds, but to drill down and ask the question of what does a genuine inclusive treaty look like? And I think I'll start with you, Ngarra, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. Firstly, just want to offer my respect to the Trish owners, so Uncle Ringo, acknowledge Wurundjeri Wurrung people and pay respect to their ancestors and elders and the family clans of their tribal territory, and also extend that respect to other mobs that are here tonight and our elders like Uncle Jim and Uncle Gary Foley, Uncle Rob, Uncle Eric and others that are with us, just to acknowledge them. As Lydia said, I'm a proud Wamba Yorta Dja Dja Wurrung Ngarra woman, and I am co-chair of the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria, and I represent the metropolitan region. Also want to acknowledge where we are today and Fitzroy, because this is an important part of our story and this place. and the political movement and the fight that come out of Fitzroy and all our families' involvement in that over generations. What does a genuine inclusive treaty look like? From our perspective, from the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria, there will be many treaties. There will be a statewide treaty that will cover statewide matters, and there will be many treaties across the tribes here in Victoria, and the context of their treaties will be their business, and to what they want a treaty on is up to those tribes, and the biggest power that they have is their sovereign power and their inherent rights. So that is their business when it comes to the kind of local treaties that will happen across the state. An inclusivity component of our work has been really important to us, to work really hard to make sure that we leave no one behind. And when we first started the Assembly in 2019, we inherited a construct that wasn't necessarily fit for purpose for us. And we wanted to open up the representation and decolonise the white constructs that we've often inherited and those imposed systems and structures. So we've worked really hard to build the cultural governance within the Assembly and be representative of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people across Victoria. So for us, the statewide treaty will include all people that live here in our country. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people will benefit from the statewide treaty, and local treaties will be inclusive of all traditional owners across the state, but also the people that live within their communities. So this is about all of us and our coexistence into the future. So for us, I feel that we haven't always got it right. It's the first time that we're building this representation and taking back that power and control to how we will self-govern. And I think we've got a little bit of work to do, but changing the way that we take part in these formal structures and in the treaty process has been really important to us. And an example of that was designing a new additional pathway for tribes to take up their rights. And recently we've added to our Assembly with the Wamba people, and they now have a representative on the Assembly, and it wasn't via native title or white constructs or the government deciding our membership. So I think that's a big power that we've had to take back in relation to how we represent and to how we'll sit at the table when it comes to treaties. So sorry, it's probably a bit of a long answer, but our treaty in Victoria will leave no one behind, and we'll make sure that we work hard across the tribes to form our treaty delegations and to bring everyone with us on this journey to treaty, because this is going to be our future and it will be ongoing and for the generations.
Thank you. Uncle Jim, did you want to have a go at that?
Well, yeah, I suppose I'd say something. I said, firstly, I want to say, Yaparingana, Ngarra Koitinina, Minalagata, Tagarilia, Koitinina. My respects to all of the people's lands and people here that we are speaking from. I'm speaking on the people's country here, the sovereignty of this country. At home, I speak from sovereignty from my country. Our sovereignty is in country. We are only the carriers of the messages from country, and that's where I stand. I see what they're doing here with treaty that Ngarra just spoke of, and I'm afraid my hearing's not real good nowadays. It's those steps that lead us towards what will one day be the sovereign treaty that we will achieve. And what I'm doing down home in Tasmania is to challenge the government through the court, who I won't make a plea in their court, but I'll stand on my country's sovereignty and challenge them on citizenship, because they never ever made any agreements with us to be citizens of this colonial nation. And this is the key point, because they have to tell the truth eventually. And when they do, they're going to have to admit openly that our sovereignty is still here in our country. I think the most important thing here is to break this lie that they've been carrying on for so long. They didn't do anything about citizenship in the colonies before they became a federated Australian Commonwealth government, which is still a colony. And therefore, I see this as the key to open the door for our next step to write our treaty, put our treaty on the table and tell the government, you can come here, we want to negotiate this. But we do not, in my view, have any way to take an acceptance of a treaty written by a colonial government. Never. So that's where I stand on this business of treaty. And I think it's very important for all of this country, because if you've got a very wobbly foundation based on lies, up here it gets wobblier and wobblier. We can see that's happening right now. It's getting wobblier and wobblier. So we have to get rid of these lies and get the sovereignty that belongs always here to be able to speak for us and the rest of Australia, because it's our rules. This is our country, our sovereignty, our rules.
Professor, what's your take on treaty?
Hello. The acoustics in this hall are terrible and playing havoc with my hearing aids, so I can't hear a lot of what is being said. But I think the question was about the treaty. Mercifully, luckily, I'm in the position in Victoria of not being involved in any of the treaty discussions because I'm not from here. This is not my country. And so I've got the luxury of being able to sit on the sidelines and throw smart-ass comments here and there to agitate the mob who are caught up in it. But from observation so far, both the treaty in Victoria and the Truth Commission, Uruk, are incredibly important moments in Australian history. And it's really vital from, the point of view of Aboriginal people all over Australia. It's really vital that Victoria succeeds in negotiating some sort of successful treaty or treaties. It's important that the Truth Commission make some genuine attempt to readdress the ignorance that Australians have about their own history and their denialism and their inability to come to terms with or even know the truth of their own history, as clearly evidenced in the results of the recent referendum, which myself and a few others clearly predicted that would be the result, but that's beside the point. The evidence is there that there is still a gulf that exists in Australia, Victoria and Australia, to the point where until such times as Australians are prepared to honestly reassess the truth of their own history without fear. There's no need for fear. Racism is born of ignorance and fear. If we can overcome the ignorance, then we can eliminate, one would hope, the fear that's behind racism. And, the treaty process itself is a minefield from my observation. There are so many difficulties that need to be overcome. Difficulties of a treaty with who, a treaty between who are the ones who are going to claim to be the legitimate representatives of whatever mob who are negotiating, all those sort of things. But I've lived in this community long enough down here, I've lived here for 50 years, to know that I have enormous confidence in the ability of the broader Victorian Aboriginal community to be able to overcome whatever obstacles are there. You know, way back as early as the first part of the 20th century, there's a long history of community organising and community activism that's very much part of the history, the unknown history, part of the history I'm talking about that Australians ought to know about, you know, inspirational history that they shouldn't fear. They should feel as proud as some of the Aboriginal people do about, you know, the political heritage that we have and that we continue to fight for. But anyway, like I say, it's a difficult process, treaty, but I got a great confidence in the local mobs of Victoria, knowing what I know of them, to overcome all obstacles, and in doing so, show a path for the rest of Australia to follow.
Thank you. Just touching on what you spoke about earlier, Ngarra, and opening it up. So just for some context, there were 38 nations, but there were 11 nations around the table prior to you becoming the co-chair, and you and Ruben Berg. So that process is now opened up. We have 38 plus nations in Victoria, 11 around the table. Now we've got one more around the table, so that makes it 12. When can we expect, or what does it look like for the rest of the mob that aren't around the table yet? And what are some of the, the challenges, I suppose, that others can learn from?
Yeah, so the way that the Assembly's composition is, it's 32, well now 33 members, very diverse from 5 regions across Victoria, and there are now 12 reserve seat holders that represent the registered Aboriginal parties, and they govern in different ways. Some mobs, there's a few tribes that govern under one governing body, and then there's over 20 seats across the Assembly that represent the regions, so myself representing the metropolitan region. So what we've worked on was opening up that additional pathway for other groups to take up their seat. So that process is open now for other tribes to apply. There's also a self-determination fund where we've got funds and resources to support traditional owner groups to organise and mobilise and to start to get treaty ready. And the Treaty Authority, which is another entity, it's an independent umpire that sits between the state and the traditional owners. They've got a lot of work to do to start to bring traditional owner groups together and to settle disputes and to work out treaty delegations across all the tribes. So we'd hope that all tribes, some people say 38, some say 44, but eventually everyone will have their right, and the framework leaves nobody out. So there's an entry point for all tribes to take up their rights. So that's something that we wanted to make sure that we're inclusive of all the traditional owner groups and respectful of all those nations and clans that are part of our communities right across the state.
So, Uncle Jim, how do you see this working in your country? Or could it work?
I said earlier that I see this as a step in the right direction towards a sovereign treaty. I worry about these treaties that are going on. They've even started one in Lutruwita, Tasmania. We have a group there who are supposedly negotiating with the government, but the government has already turned it back on them and ignoring them and talking to the pretenders, these white people who are pretending to be Aboriginal because they agree with government. So the government's trying this division with white people who are pretenders and our community selected group who were to engage with the government and negotiate some forward ways of going with the treaty. I worry about it. It really worries me. Because at the end of the day, with these state-driven treaties at the moment, and even if the Commonwealth was to do the same thing, They are domestic agreement treaties. And what we're doing is making agreements to remain under colonialism in their legislation, under their constitution. And it worries me because they can revoke it. They can do a whole range of things the way they play games. So let's push on. I agree with what the Ngarra's group is doing. I agree with it. Push on for what they are prepared to tell the truth about and to make a treaty, even though it is a domestic agreement treaty. Because the next step is to get to a sovereign treaty. And what I'm doing, I don't expect to see that a successful thing in my lifetime. I'm 81 now, 82 in a couple of months, 4 months. And I expect that somewhere down the track, I'm hoping that what I'm doing is opening the door for a push into the real truth of citizenship and no jurisdiction by these courts who are putting our people in jails and whatever they're doing to us. And these governments are still colonial governments. And so I'm going to the fundamental cause of our problems, but that doesn't mean that I can make those changes with the groups of people that are supporting me, and we're getting good support right around the country, and especially here. Lidia has been amazing with her and her office in supporting what we're doing. But as I say, there's still more. There's still much more than what I can achieve with the political activism that I'm doing at the moment. But I do feel that if we don't start this now, we fall back into the distractions that they try to get through with the referendum. It was a clever referendum because they was putting forward this voice to Parliament. That wasn't what they wanted. That was a great distraction. They wanted recognising that constitution. And Peter Dutton came out when it was almost definite it was going to be a failure and said, when I'm PM, I'll make sure we put recognising the constitution. And if they'd have succeeded, what I'm proposing now in my activism would be null and void. They would have cut us off at the pass. That would have recognised us in the constitution. We accept their government, we're citizens. No more argument. So these are the kinds of tricks that they're playing on us. And I'm all heart with Ngarra and her group to get this treaty moving in this government here, because it's a test. It means a test for all the other governments in this country. Eventually somewhere we're going to make that success. And as Lidia said, get peace. Because if we don't get peace, we're always going to be at loggerheads with our people going to jail, educated to disbelieve our culture and heritage. I'm with this Ngarra's group, this treaty, knowing that it's the first step towards wherever we can get to push this government in Australia, the Australian government, to come to us when we put a treaty on the table and accept that they have to sign a treaty with us, and they're not getting the right to write the treaty. We put that there, and we've got to be a lot more work to do. There are some people now who are working on principles for a treaty, and some are working on a criteria for a treaty, and we need something that's going to be an umbrella that each of the nations, each of the First Nations here in this country can negotiate the particulars of their treaty for their country and their sovereignty on their country. And that's how I see the future, way beyond my time.
Thanks, Uncle Jim. Gary, I was going to ask you particularly, obviously native title is not land rights. Is treaty land rights?
Should be.
This year is the 100th anniversary of the formation of the first modern Aboriginal political organisation, the Australian Aborigines Progressive Association in New South Wales. From that day, the first organised political movement amongst Aboriginal Australians. From that day, the issue always was self-determination. What is self-determination? Economic and political independence, you know. Part of my problem with the idea of treaties is just look at the experience of the Native Americans. Every treaty they ever signed, broken. I mean, you know, they call it the Trail of Broken Treaties. Same in Canada. The only treaty in the world that seems to have stood up, but only after it was ignored for its first 150 years of existence, was the Treaty of Waitangi. What happens in Victoria if just when you're on the edge of signing this treaty with the state government, this state government gets turfed, thrown out? We get in a new government, and if any new government either in the state or federally in Australia, if we follow the path of the rest of the Western world at the moment, the next lot of politicians up there in power are going to be ultra-right-wing lunatics along the lines of Donald Trump and others. So what happens then, you know? And it's entirely conceivable that a government coming in right at the end of the negotiation process could just as easily throw out the idea and say we want to revert back to the old project of assimilation, which incidentally, the project of assimilation is far more advanced today than it ever was. And give us another 50 to 75 years and you won't be talking about Aboriginal people, there won't be any left. And this is all part of the history that I talk about that Australians need to learn. It's not just the big issue, the big elephant in the room called Anglo-Australian racism. You've got to dig even deeper again and look where the underlying sort of notions that help develop not only those notions of racism, but also the policies that were inflicted on us for the greater part of the 20th century, right up until I was 17 years old, the official policy of assimilation. Assimilation equals genocide, for the simple reason that the desired end result of a policy of assimilation is that there be no Aborigines. Simple. Assimilation equals genocide. Yet that was the policy until I was 17 years old. That's the reason for your stolen generation and all of that. And all of that grew out of the 19th century notion of eugenics. Eugenics is at the heart of the white Australian racism that most of the Australian races have no insight into. That's part of what we need to do if we're to educate the people. The first thing you've got to do, educate yourself, then educate the people, as my great mentor Chicka Dixon used to always say.
So that goes to truth-telling. And we've seen through the Europe Commission here, truth-telling commission here, that there are a lot of truths being told and there's a lot of apologies being made, especially by the police and other racist regimes that the colonial project puts on us every day. Just going back to your experience with the commission, Ngarra, and why that truth-telling is integral, I suppose, to treaty.
Yeah, it's so important, and I think when we established the Assembly, many conversations that we'd had with community, and over generations, obviously, we've been telling our truths. But one thing that we heard from our community was that there can be no treaty without truth, and that prompted us to put up a resolution across our Assembly chamber to establish a truth-telling commission. So we have the first truth-telling commission of its kind in this country. We wrote the letters patent, and that initiated the Europe Justice Commission. I think it's powerful, the work that they are doing, and the commissioners and the work and the coercive power that they have to subpoena premiers and ministers and police commissioners to Yuruk is just profound, and they've been able to unravel a colonial system, over 250 years, looking at the atrocities, injustices of our people. And I think that they've been able to examine recently, the criminal justice system, child protection system. They're currently in the inquiry now, the hearings on social injustice. They've done land injustice. So it'll play an important part in carving that path to treaty. So there'll be a lot that we'll pick up in our treaty negotiations. Their report will be finished in June next year. So they've got 12 months to go. And I think there'll definitely be a legacy piece that will carry over, because we're always telling our truths. So looking at that and what that will look like in a treaty landscape. But yeah, I can't emphasise how important the work is of those commissioners and the work that they are doing. And you can get online and sit in the hearings and watch the hearings online. So I encourage you all to find out more about the Yuruk Justice Commission.
Thank you. Thank you. Uncle Jim, I just wanted to give you an opportunity, I suppose, to do some truth-telling here, and particularly the fight that you have in front of you right now, if you're okay to talk about that.
My fight with the forestry mob. I had a phone call from the police from Flinders Island 2 days ago saying that they had an arrest warrant for me and they'd come to Cape Barren Island and pick me up. But I said, I'm on Cape Barren, I might save yourself a trip. I'm not telling you where I am. Look, one of the things I think is really important that we should really be aware of is that we're dealing with a Labor Liberal coalition government in the federal government and in the state governments. They know when this one's getting a bit off colour with the people in the public, they just hand it over to the other mob and they just do it a little bit different. But they're still doing what they're doing against us. They just do it a little bit different. So I call it the Labor Liberal coalition, because that's what they are. And the Greens are sitting in the wings and they don't really have that straightforward look either, because they still got that white privilege stuck in their head. So these are the problems I see. I went to Bob Brown because he's protecting our forests and his defenders. All of the forest defenders of the Bob Brown Foundation are in there. And where's our mob? What did we lose that we sort of weren't there? So I decided that we had to be there. It's our forest. And they're cutting down those big giants, those beautiful big eucalypts that are 80 or more years old, and that's what they're really after for the last big grab, because they know that climate change is going to force them to stop. So they're all there taking this big grab. And because there was a sort of a stoppage up here on the mainland of old growth forest, the trucks started coming down from Victoria and New South into Tasmania to get the big logs. And we'd see them going through the city there in Hobart, for instance. So I joined with Bob Brown because I thought the best thing to do is to start getting my own group, Pakana and Palawa, to be in that forest, our colours, our voice. We're not being led by the Bob Brown Foundation, but we're there as allies because that's what we should be there for. But if they do things that we're not agreeing with, we'll go and sit down and we'll negotiate them through so they understand why we don't agree with anything that they might do that we disagree. So far we've had a minor one, but other than that, we're going along quite well. So we've been, my man Ruth Langford, who's sitting down the front here, we've both been, it's just the two of us, and we're developing a national movement to support when I get arrested and taken into the court and stand on my sovereignty, that there's going to be people right around this country flare up and challenge the government to tell the truth. You've never had a citizenship arrangement with us. Tell the truth. You've got to come to the table when we put the treaty there and negotiate, because we're not your citizens. We're still our own free, self-determining sovereigns. We've got to get our space back. So that's where I am sort of standing at the moment. It's simple. I don't think I'm being very clever. It's just straightforward, really. It's not radical. When was it radical to ask for somebody to pass back what they've stolen from you? That's not radical. The ones that are radical are the ones that still hang on to it and say, no, it's ours. That's radical. So we've got to challenge this country. Is exactly what Brother Foley here just said earlier. We've got to assimilate their thinking into the reality of this country is something that has to be taken care of in our way, our Pakana Palawa way of looking at it. We have a saying, we are country, country is us. We are very much a part of country. So every time they cut country, every time they cut trees, every time they're digging up the oil and the gases, they're hurting us because we're very much a part of this country. I feel it. I've been in there and seen those big logs, those big stumps that they've cut down and the big trees are gone, and they don't understand the damage they're doing. Not just to the relational ecosystem, but to us people as well. And if they only knew it, they're hurting themselves as well. So it's these slow steps that we're in for, because, as I say, we're dealing with a Democratic Party dictatorship government that is a coalition of Labor and Liberal. They know that they pass it backwards and forwards. We've seen this for as long as we've been here with these fellows. So we have to make these very strong challenges. We get a domestic agreement treaty in place. The next step is to take the full brunt onto them. But all the more that we try around the country, all of us black fellows that are standing up and challenging them on their sovereignty, eventually have got to break through somewhere. And the more we get support out in the general community, far better that we have that to tell the government, you've got to make these changes. And I don't mind going to jail if it can actually achieve that. As I say, it may be past my lifetime with any success, but we can't just sit down and let them keep running rife over us and hurting our kids, putting our people in jail, up there in the Northern Territory, age of 10 into big jails. I mean, what kind of country is that? And we don't want a country like that. And I'm sure that the general population don't want a country like that. So these dictatorships have got to be challenged really heavily.
What? I was going to talk about something completely different.
You can speak whatever you want to speak about. You've got the microphone.
I want to have my 2 bobs worth on the Truth Commission. And I'm not saying this to have a go at members of the Commission. It's just observations from an old bloke who's been around a lot longer than most of them, that's all. I thought it was great news when the government announced that they were going to hold a Truth Commission in Victoria. I was even more pleased when I realised that this Truth Commission has got the full powers of a Royal Commission. That's extraordinary power. And I, straight away, as a historian, saw a great opportunity there to address a wrong of the past, the recent past. I'm going blind as well as deaf, so I can't see any of you out there, but I'm assuming that there are people in this audience who are old enough to remember our dearly beloved Premier Jeff Kennett, perhaps, right? Now, those of you who remember Jeff Kennett will remember that he created an enormous crime against some of the most powerless group of people in Melbourne, school kids, and especially underprivileged school kids, including a bunch of Koori school kids at a place called Northland Secondary College. And those kids put up a fight. It took them 3 years, but they eventually won before the Supreme Court of Victoria, which ordered Jeff Kennett to reopen the school. The only problem was that the Supreme Court seemed to consider that reopening the school would address the 3 years of lost education for a big group of students, both Koreans and non-Koreans, who lost their chance in education for 3 years because of the actions of Jeff Kennett. I said during the Equal Opportunity Board hearings at the time, 30 years ago, I said if Kennett was able to proceed in closing this school, some of these kids were in such a vulnerable situation that some of them would die. Didn't take long for that to start happening. You know, some of them committed suicide. It was a terrible thing, affecting not just their families, but whole communities of people in the northern suburbs. Now, I consider that to be a crime against not just the Aboriginal community, the economically underprivileged community of out Preston Way. And the Supreme Court thought, handed back to school, that was it, no compensation for anybody. And so the kids who lost their education, including my son, who's never had a job in his life to this day, he's just turned 50, you know, those kids had their lives destroyed by Jeff Kennett. And so I thought it was perfectly reasonable proposition, given that this is a truth commission. This is about bringing, you know, people who are still out in the community who've committed those sort of crimes against communities. They should be brought to account, at least made to sit and listen before an audience of the community whose lives they destroyed, you know. And if nothing else, I wanted the Commission to hold a community hearing out in Preston, Darty Munwarra, invite all the TV cameras, subpoena Jeff Kennett to be made to sit there and listen to the stories of the lives he destroyed. You know, I wouldn't expect anything else to come out. I said to the Commission they'd be in a position to make recommendations for some sort of belated compensation for some of these kids who are still alive. But I was told that that'd be too difficult. And I said, too difficult? Why, pray tell, might that be? And I was told, well, Jeff Kennett's a former Premier. And I said, so fucking what? Well, so what? You know, either people are to be held accountable or not. So what if he's a Premier? It was as Premier that he committed these acts that we want him pulled before you. It's within your scope, you know. But somebody somewhere along the line seems to have been too worried about embarrassing Jeff or something like that. Now, the only reason I'm telling you this story is because you, as the public, are entitled to know some of the nitty-gritty that goes on behind the scenes. I believe that the Truth Commission, in a broader sense, is doing some great stuff, but there's a lot of stuff that they're not addressing. You know, it's all fine and dandy to talk about making an apology for something that happened 100 years ago, but what about the, you know, the old Northern Territory Patrol officers who were in our midst? What's about the old Department of Aboriginal Affairs, scumbag public servants who committed so many crimes against our people? You know? What about some of the politicians who are still alive? You know, as part of your broader education, I'll just finish on this, part of your broader education, it's important to know and understand, and I'm speaking as somebody who's been at the cutting edge of things for the last 50 years. I know a little bit about politics and history. I put it to you that the two worst prime ministers for Aboriginal people, for Aboriginal people's interests, in my lifetime, have been the government of Gough Whitlam and Bob Hawke and Paul Keating.
Yep.
Gough Whitlam, we loved Gough Whitlam as much as everybody in Australia at the time. You know, it was time. He said clearly in his 1972 election speech, my government will deliver land rights for Aboriginal people. Unequivocal. Took him less than 12 months to back off that promise. 10 years later, Bob Hawke comes in, declaring that he's learnt the lesson from Whitlam and he promises national uniform land rights legislation. And we thought, oh yeah, this will be interesting. Took him less than 12 months to back off. It only took him for as long as it took to have a meeting with the most corrupt politician in Australia at the time. Those you old enough will remember, he went to jail for corruption. The West Australian Premier Brian Burke, who also happened to be the national president of the ALP, he got in Bob Hawke's ear and said, "Hey, Bob, forget about those black bastards. What about our mates in the mining industry? What about our mates, our donors in the pastoral industry? Fuck the blacks." Bob Hawke said, "Fuck the blacks. Instead of giving them land rights, we'll give them native title, the most inferior form of land tenure under British law." And we were supposed to be happy about that. Bullshit. The problem all of us have got, is that our parliament houses are full of politicians. And apart from the one that's sitting on stage with us, all politicians are lying bastards. That's all.
Well, there's some truth telling right there. And you're right. And that now we have Albanese, who promised treaty as well, and he's backpedaling on that one as well. I thought I'd just give the audience a moment to ask a question if you have one. We can fit in maybe 3 questions if you keep it short. So if there's anyone out there that has a burning question, I still have a list of questions, but I'll hand it to the audience and we'll go. I can see somebody here. Yes. Would you stand up? We don't have a microphone out there, do we?
Go.
We can city stuff out.
Coming to you now.
So, like a conversation with the current, the never-changing Australian government kind of implies that there's this belief in their side that there's some humanity there to kind of come and, actually negotiate. Is that actually something we think will happen? Because I feel like a lot of people around me don't believe in them.
Sorry, I didn't quite get your question.
He's asking whether or not if the Australian government have enough humanity that they're sure enough to even enter into it.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I can speak for this jurisdiction, but obviously at the federal level, we've seen what happened through the referendum and how brutal that was, and the country hadn't matured and was ready for whatever we were proposing through that referendum. From our jurisdiction, we have 2 treaty laws in place that bind us to the state government for treaty making, and they've got to comply with that. The current government within this term are committed to doing treaties, and in the next 300 days, the first treaties negotiations will begin. So I think that we're in a strong position. We're preparing to come to the table, and we'll notify the Treaty Authority here in Victoria that we believe, from a statewide treaty perspective, the Assembly is the Aboriginal representative body, and the tribes can do it at the same time. So I feel, from my perspective, we're ready to do treaty in this state, and we have a government committed to that process, and we have a really solid treaty negotiation framework and treaty authority, something that the Maori mob didn't have through their Waitangi Treaty. So we've really got some solid foundations to enable treaty making to begin, as I said, in the next few hundred days. and then well into the future. And that's from our perspective here in Victoria. But time will tell, and this will be the test, as Uncle Jim and Uncle Gary have said, around everybody's watching to see where we land. So you can feel the gravity of that and the responsibility and the burden that we carry to get treaty done properly on our terms, our way. So, yeah, I'm not sure if I quite answered your question, but it's hard to hear with the acoustics in this hall, so I don't know how these balls are going.
I might have a go at that as well. The federal space is a dog eat dog. Most of the deals are done outside of the chamber. Deals are being done now, probably, over drinks somewhere for next week's legislation. But it's not up to the we don't have to leave it up to the politicians either. It's got to be a people's movement. If the politicians run it, then I won't sign up to it. It's got to be the people running it. And I think there's enough of us in this country to put pressure on the people who you vote for or not. Elections are what makes politicians, and we have the power in the people to get rid of a lot of these politicians. And, at the end of the night, you'll get a treaty pledge and you'll sign up to the treaty pledge, and we'll ask those federal politicians the same. We know that the coalition doesn't like treaty. They don't even know what treaty is. They just think we're going to steal their backyard or get our backyard back, But it's different in different jurisdictions, as you've heard. I suppose my follow-up question to that is, Victoria is being seen to be the model, but what can we learn from the model so far? And that's, I don't think we're going to have much more time to go right into those details. But we need to have a push for treaty like we did 50 years ago, and not the colonisers' treaty. It's got to be the treaty on our terms. And as Uncle Rob says, we'll write it, you sign it, and that's exactly how it should be. It's got to be on our terms, from our sovereign stance, because we've never lost that. And we have the power as sovereigns. They don't. And we need to use that power, but we need to be organised right across this country and push for treaty. The Yes campaign, they need to get back on their bike and start pushing for treaty. Okay, I think I'll get Gary to respond, and then we'll have one more question from the audience, and then we'll come back to Uncle.
I've forgotten what I was going to say. It's way past my bedtime, you know.
All right, next question. Yeah, just down here.
Doesn't there have to be a federal treaty before there can be state treaties to keep those state treaties in check? And in order to have a federal treaty, don't you first have to have admittance of sovereignty?
What was that last comment about sovereignty? I missed that word.
Admittance.
Admittance.
Yes. From them.
Of our sovereignty.
Yes.
How does it sound? I can't.
So do we need to have a federal treaty to be able to have state and territory treaties? And do they need to acknowledge that we are sovereign?
Yes.
To have a treaty?
Yes.
We are.
What's that? I still didn't hear you. Oh, I'll get not coming through, please.
Do you want to start answering Ngarra?
Yeah, I understand that. That's part of the question, isn't it? I mean, you know, that's hanging over it. But I mean, what's happening now in Victoria is that a state government has decided to proceed with this sort of process. So, as much as anything else, like I suggested before, what's going on in Victoria is unprecedented, and all the more reason why it's so important that it succeeds, you know, because if it doesn't succeed, and if the Truth Commission doesn't achieve its intended purpose, then it's going to set us back many years politically, Aboriginal people, in the same way as the fools who decided to hold a referendum have set us back 50 years. It's time for the younger generation. For those of you who don't know any history, I'll give you a history lesson. 60 years ago, in the late 1960s, at the time of the 1967 referendum, when 90% of the Australian people voted in support of Aboriginal rights, 1967. Back in 1967, the older generation had sold us younger generation on supporting them for the referendum because they told us if they got a yes vote, things would change. Well, things didn't change. And so we as a younger generation essentially told the older generation, okay, go away and have a cup of tea. We're going to develop our own tactics and strategies, which, with the Aboriginal Embassy, proved highly successful. We changed the course of Australian history within 4 years at the Aboriginal Embassy in 1972. And so the strange collection of people who come up with the idea of a referendum were clearly people who didn't know anything about their own history. Anyone who knows anything about Australian history in the last 50 years knows that, for a start, we've had 40 years of history and culture wars. We've had major campaigns by the mining and pastoral industry, anti-Aboriginal campaigns. We've had the big white backlash that occurred after the success of the 72 embassy. So there was no way you're going to get a yes vote in the year 2023 on any issue to do with Aboriginal people. But by bumbling on and proceeding ahead with that idea and having your referendum, the predictable happened, which has convinced, I guarantee you, virtually convinced all Australian politicians to not go near Aboriginal issues again for another 50 years. You know, big deal. So it's time for the younger generation to tell my generation, not me, but the mob in my generation who come up with this stupid idea, it's time to pension them off, put them out to pasture. It's time for the younger generation to look at the situation that confronts you in your time, in this time, in your world, the world that you're going to have to live in and grow up in. It's your time to now take control and develop your own tactics and strategies that are applicable to your situation in your time. And you either got the great advantage or the great disadvantage that we didn't have back in my day, and that is social media, the ability to communicate with anyone anywhere on the planet in an instant. If we'd have had that power in 72, we'd be running Australia now. You'd probably be demonstrating against us. But in closing, I'm leaving after this. In closing, the other thing I've got to say to the youth of the world is believe that you can change your world. A bunch of us, back in the late 60s in places like Redfern and Fitzroy and South Brisbane, half-educated, penniless, nobodies. And yet within 4 years we're able to build a national pan-Aboriginal movement that shook the shit out of the Australian government of Billy McMahon, and eventually, as Gough Whitlam said, helped bring him down. So know that it is possible to change your world, but you can't do it by yourself. Get-togethers with other like-minded people like yourself, educate yourself, get organised, educate the people, and go out and have your revolution. And when you win, when you change your world, don't be like my generation. We took our eye off the ball and the bastards changed it back. Don't let them do that to you. That's all.
Well, thank you. I think that was what we needed to hear, because we can make treaty happen. We just have to believe in it ourselves. And as a Gunai woman, particularly today, you know, there will be, as far as I'm concerned for my treaty, there will be no nuclear power station going on in the Latrobe Valley. There will be no logging. You know, so climate, treaty is climate. Like we have to have a peace treaty to save the planet, to stop logging, to stop the destruction of country, to stop Eric Fijo's country at Lee Point and Middle Arm, who's come down from Middle Arm to be here tonight and to catch up with old people and connection and getting strength from one another and knowing that we're not in this fight on our own. So that's a treaty I want to see. I want to see my people in what is now called Gippsland prosper, not be the sickest and poorest people on their own land with mass destruction around them. Treaty is our children thriving and our old people thriving and being looked after on country and future generations. These fellas don't care about future generations. No politician in that whole place cares about future generations. They care about how long they got their seat for. Wow. So we have to act. It's like a climate emergency. We need a treaty in this country to end the war against our people. And I'm going to just go through the panel for final wrap-up, and if you could please include what allies can be doing to support what needs to happen.
Yeah, there's a lot that allies can do. All that goodwill, all that support we had last year, we've got to manifest that into treaty. And you've got to write to your local politicians, because it's going to get politicised. So we've got to show that strong message of treaty and the new treaty future that we're about to enter into. So, yeah, just there's a lot that you can do. And through your allyship, there's a lot that you can bring to our space, but also respecting, not overstepping the line, and making sure your values and your efforts align with our mob as well when you are in our space. So that's kind of my opinion.
Thank you, Ngarra.
Yes. What Lydia was just saying, it really strikes home, and we've proved it in Tasmania, Lutawita. Up here, Australian Lydia. And when she died, they declared us extinct. And we're extinct from 1876 right through until 1995. We started to come back at them in 1973 when Ruth Langford's mother, Ros Langford, a Yorta woman, came to Tasmania and founded the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre, and that's when our fight began to come back. And we started it in 1973, and in 1995 we buckled the government and they handed back 12 parcels of land and acknowledged us as a living Aboriginal community. So you can bring these things back. You can make change. And what I'm doing with Ruth, we're building our groups down there. We're calling the Pakana All-Life Community Initiative. We're not an organisation. We're not working under organisations. We don't take government money or money from any of the exploiters of our ecosystems. So it is possible to build that strength back into your community who have been buckled by what the government's been doing against us, what these corporations are doing to us. Because they're just the team leaders of the corporations' projects, these fellas in government. That's all they are. You know, their job is to make sure the corporations still get their profits no matter what. But we've proven you can come back in 22 years of a struggle from extinction to having our land returned. We have now about 21 or 22 parcels of land back. It's not just land. We're not getting enough support from the government to be able to manage our lands because, like they did with ATSIC, they drained the money off them until they failed. They forced the failure into ATSIC. So now we're coming back again. And this is what I'm saying. Ngarra and her mob that are working in the parliament there to try and get a treaty here is the step towards what we need to get right around the country and eventually break them down so that they have to sit down and make that sovereign treaty with us. So I think that we've done pretty good. And to see this happening in here in Victoria and some of the attempts that are sort of not getting anywhere, Queensland, South Australia, Tasmania, trying to negotiate with them. We're building, and that strength will eventually force the government to have to negotiate with us, and we have to be very strong in how we negotiate that treaty, not anything that they put in front of us, but what we put in front of them.
If anyone's interested in taking up my challenge to educate yourselves, in the near future, advertised through however you found out about this tonight, the renowned Melbourne School of Discontent, which is consists of myself, Tony Birch and Jackie Katona, will be doing another series of history lectures online, which I would strongly urge you to tune into. Won't cost you much, only $10 a session, but you'll learn more in the space of 3 hours over a couple of days than you've learnt in all of the rest of your life about your own history. You'll see, some of you will see how you've been drinking from the Kool-Aid of eugenics without even realising it. And it'll help you come to a bit better understanding of some of the things we see happening around us in Australia today. But that's the Melbourne School of Discontent. You get 3 living legends for the price of 1, folks. Well, what more could you ask for? And better still, a genuine local hero, Tony Birch, you know. So, and Tony, long before he became a renowned literary lion, he was one of the best Indigenous history professors in the country, and that's the mode you'll see him in when you come to the Melbourne School of Discontent lectures. But Lydia will advertise that at the time. And thank you, folks. That's it from me. Pass my bedtime.
Thank you for coming again. Cold night, but we have been warmed by some incredible company, and I hope that you've enjoyed tonight. I know that there's many burning questions, but there is an opportunity to put those questions forward, and we will put those answers on the website. We'll follow through and get to every question, because there are a lot of questions that we want to be able to answer, and we want you to be part of the solution as well, and use your allyship, use your space to create a space for not only sovereigns but for the conversation on treaty and truth-telling. We need to hold our organisations accountable, our workplaces, our home places. But I just want to say thank you again. And I also want to just quickly, Eric, if you could stand up and just put your hand up. Eric Fejo has been fighting. Fighting the dodgy gas companies in the Northern Territory, Middle Arm and Lee Point. The bulldozers have rolled in. I was there with Eric, who kindly showed me around, and I got to call the Chief Minister of the Northern Territory government, the Chief Minister for Genocide, and she wasn't really, she didn't like that. But Eric did, so I was happy. I got that one over. Thank you all again. Sign up to the newsletter. And the treaty pledge. Don't forget about the treaty pledge. And there is information on Middle Arm and Lee Point that Eric's brought with him. So please get on to that as well. And thanks again.
Yeah, that one here.
Let's not forget, this government is a guilty government across the world. From the river to the sea. We're in support. From the river to the sea.
Right on. I'll be over the road.